back to Drunk on Writing and the latest episode of the Tarantino Dissection. It's brought to you in part through the patronage of Ariya Norinth. Today, we've done it. We've gotten here. We're finally discussing Quentin Tarantino's most picked apart, most prodded, most analyzed, most awarded film, 1994's Pulp Fiction, which, fun fact, opened in theaters against both Forrest Gump and The Shawshank Redemption. What a weekend to be a movie geek, huh? I feel like, given I've already done a dissection on Shawshank, and, well, here we are, that I have to do one on Forrest Gump eventually, right? Don't I? I mean, I like Forrest Gump, so I think that one's definitely in the cards. But today is all about Pulp Fiction, the film that literally made multiple careers and changed Hollywood forever. But where'd it come from? Why is it so weird? And why is this film celebrated for ripping off so many others? Before we get to all that, of course, if you enjoy this video, please be sure to give it a like, please subscribe to the channel, and please consider heading on over to drunkonwriting.com where you can get more videos more often, unless it takes me forever to write and research as this one did. Don't worry, it's worth it, I think. Now, in the last Tarantino dissection, when we dug into Reservoir Dogs, I specifically noted how it laid the groundwork for what the director would come to be known for. But Pulp Fiction, Tarantino's follow-up, is what he's known for, even though it's really not all that different than his first outing. We've got the pop culture references, the killer soundtrack, the quippy dialogue, the experimental narrative, the defining monologues, the playful repartee. They both even start at a diner, featuring Tim Roth no less. All the same ingredients are here, it's all just bigger, thanks to a bigger cast and a bigger budget. And as I said last time, that very much makes sense given Reservoir Dogs was originally part of Pulp Fiction, a Pulp Fiction that never was. One provisionally titled Black Mask, after the classic pulp magazine. I wonder why they didn't have John Travolta read that on the toilet instead of Peter O'Donnell's Modesty Blaze, other than, of course, Tarantino wanting to direct a film based on O'Donnell's character. He executive produced the 2004 My Name is Modesty, produced pro forma for Miramax so they, and in essence he, could keep the rights. Maybe we'll have to do a video on that one day. In the end, the Pulp Fiction that is serves as an amalgamation of unproduced scenes from the Tarantino and longtime collaborator Roger Avary catalog, including My Best Friend's Birthday, The Open Road, Pandemonium Reigns, Natural Born Killers, True Romance, and yes, Reservoir Dogs. As Avary recounted, Pulp Fiction was originally to be 3 short films by 3 directors, Quentin Tarantino, Adam Rifkin, and myself. Quick side note here before I continue that quote. You may or may not know director Adam Rifkin, director of Detroit Rock City and writer of Small Soldiers, among many other things. But continuing our run of interesting coincidences, Rifkin happened to direct one of Burt Reynolds' final films, The Last Movie Star. After which, Tarantino also cast Reynolds in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And if you've been paying attention, you know that was kind of a big deal that sadly did not come to pass. But we'll get to that another day. Continuing where we left off with Avary, though, he went on, Adam declined it, and Quentin and I expanded our short scripts into Pandemonium Reigns and what would eventually become Reservoir Dogs. After Dogs, Quentin told me he wanted to do Pulp, but do them all himself, and he wanted my script for it. Tarantino, for his part, explained the project this way. I got the idea of doing something that novelists get a chance to do, but filmmakers don't. Telling 3 separate stories, having characters float in and out with different weights depending on the story. And so, in March 1992, with Reservoir Dogs behind him, Tarantino, along with Avary, as the latter put it, went to Amsterdam with all of their favorite scenes that had never found their way into a movie and pasted them together to make Pulp Fiction. From Avary, who'd eventually leave to work on his own film, Killing Zoe, this included the miracle of Jules and Verne not being shot, Marvin's unfortunate backseat death, and the core of what would become the Gold Watch. Is it just me? That sounds like a lot, right? I mean, you'd think Avary's name would be splashed on the film almost as much as Tarantino's, right? Well, sort of. As the film's opening credits, as the film's trailer tells us, this is a film by Quentin Tarantino, based on stories from him and Roger Avary. And yet, what do we see in the end credits? Written and directed by Quentin Tarantino. The reasoning behind this branding is muddy, to say the least. And while the original deal between Tarantino and Avery was for a split writing and screenplay credit, from what I gather, hanging the film on Tarantino's name after Reservoir Dogs' success was a studio marketing ploy that Tarantino nonetheless backed. So Avery, he gets a call from Tarantino's attorney, not Tarantino himself, who wants him to sign a contract writer, basically killing his screenwriting credits. And at first, Avery refuses, which I agree with. I wouldn't want to refuse. I wrote this thing. You got credits, but which really upset Tarantino, it seems, who, according to Avery, told him, "Okay, fine. I'm going to rewrite the script and write all of your contributions out of the screenplay, and you're going to get nothing." Great friend right there, isn't it? But he did eventually get Avery to agree. "I bought my house off that film," Avery'd later say, "so I'm not complaining. But that was the moment when the fissure occurred in our relationship." I'm sure comments like this from Tarantino didn't help matters either. The things that Roger thinks are betrayal are just the natural way that things change. I had said, "Let me buy Pandemonium Reigns. I'll do a first pass, incorporate it into my material, and then you can come in and we could do another pass on it." Well, that second pass never happened because I pretty much did it all in the first pass. There was no reason to bring him in anymore. Pandemonium Reigns could never have been produced. I just liked the basic idea of it and a couple of incidents and threw the rest away. It upsets me just saying that. Just throw that one out there. What a friend. What a friend. And even though Tarantino helped Avery find financing for killing Zoe, on which he was an executive producer, all this and what happened at the Academy Awards, which we'll cover a little later, led to a decades-long rift between the two, with Avery noting in the early 2000s, "Love Quentin like a brother, can never speak to him again without feeling as though he'll take my intellectual properties." I'm sure he feels the same way about me. Though, good news. In 2019, in an interview with Andrew J. Rausch, Avery gave this update. "Quentin and I are having dinner soon. We're going to have it at this Thai restaurant we love where we wrote parts of Pulp Fiction at. We've been talking. Not every day, but we talk frequently. Understand, we hadn't really talked in 10 years, and we've been somewhat estranged for about 25 years. But I've always loved Quentin. He's one of my very best friends. Always has been." And apparently, they're going to be launching a podcast together soon. So, riffs mended and all that. Anyways, so we have a script which ends up getting typed up by Tarantino's friend Linda Chen. "His handwriting is atrocious," she said about this. "He's a functional illiterate. I was averaging about 9,000 grammatical errors per page. After I would correct them, he would try to put back the errors because he liked them. He ended up naming Honey Bunny after Chen's pet rabbit as thanks, so there's that, I guess." Anyways, so where was so we have a script, which Tarantino and, of course, his producer Lawrence Bender, who you can spot in the film as the long-hair yuppie scum. Yes, that is his official character name. They bring it to Danny DeVito's Jersey Films, which had struck a $1 million development deal with the two before Reservoir Dogs premiered, and they had a distribution and first look deal with Columbia TriStar, who apparently didn't get it, with then studio head Mike Medavoy thinking it was too demented. Why? Well, have you seen the movie? Something like this, sometimes it's just a risk that you can't take at that moment. So Pulp Fiction ends up in turnaround, meaning in essence the studio is looking to sell their rights. And story has it either Danny DeVito himself, or more likely, Miramax head of production Richard Gladstein, who'd gotten the script from Bender, passed it on to perhaps the only person that could have made Pulp Fiction possible at this moment, Harvey Weinstein. Hey, if there's any good he's done, it's this. Now, Weinstein reads it, he loves it, and Pulp Fiction becomes the first project to get a green light at the recently acquired by Disney Miramax, which Weinstein was co-chair of. It's given an $8.5 million budget, kept low thanks to an agreement to pay relatively low salaries across the board, subsidized by a percentage of the profits. While, at the start, a pretty good hustle on Weinstein's part, turned out to be a pretty good deal, given those profits came almost immediately thanks to the $11 million paid for the film's international rights. Remember, the cast weren't stars at this point. Sure, most had been in a variety of films, including several in Reservoir Dogs, but beyond Bruce Willis, who was convinced by his friend Harvey Keitel to be part of the film, he was a fan of Reservoir Dogs. And can we just talk about how crucial Harvey Keitel was to Tarantino's start? Between this and financing Dogs, he was like Tarantino's godfather. Jeez. And he played the pivotal role of the Wolf for Pulp Fiction, a part not that different from one he previously played in 1993's Point of Return, and one he'd reprised in a series of commercials for Direct Line starting in 2014. But yeah, even if Willis was really only known for Die Hard, unless you count Look Who's Talking, and his recent films, Hudson Hawk, The Last Boy Scout, had been both critical and box office disappointments, he was still something of a draw. How do you think they sold those international rights, huh? But besides him, nothing. Even John Travolta, once a pretty big name, he was almost at the point of obscurity as well, buoyed in part by the Look Who's Talking franchise. But none of that mattered, because Tarantino was the draw. Remember, written and directed, right? He also wrote all of the characters with specific actors in mind. The Wolf, written for Harvey Keitel. Butch? No, not written for Bruce Willis. Actually, written for, get this, Matt Dillon, who apparently hesitated to sign on. But because John Travolta was given the role of Vincent, more on that in a moment, the role Willis originally wanted, and Willis eyed Butch instead, well, history was made and Willis made his sort of comeback, beating out other possibilities for the role like Mickey Rourke and Sylvester Stallone. Now, John Travolta, who plays the pivotal Vincent Vega, he's the only character in every segment of the film. He gets first billing in the credits. Bruce Willis gets a coveted and credit. But Vincent was written for Michael Madsen, who of course played Vic Vega in Reservoir Dogs, but couldn't commit to Pulp Fiction because he'd already signed on to 1994's Wyatt Earp. Given Travolta earned himself an Academy Award nomination for his performance, which he's said to have chosen over the chance to play Seth Gecko in From Dusk Till Dawn, smart decision. I'm sure Madsen has kicked himself time and again for that decision. But would it have been the same? I really rather doubt it, since John Travolta was the one who came up with Vincent's now iconic look, and, of course, given his history with the likes of Saturday Night Fever, brought a reality-based depth to the character, something that would have been lacking with Madsen, or, frankly, any of the other possibilities, including Daniel Day-Lewis, James Gandolfini, Sean Penn, and William Hurt. Plus, without Travolta taking on the role, we wouldn't have been teased for the last 15 years about the possibility of a Vega Brothers spin-off. Outside of which, I should note, Travolta and Tarantino have never teamed up again. At least not yet. Samuel L. Jackson, who of course played Jules, and years and a franchise later would have his character's tombstone engraved with the path of the righteous man in Captain America the Winter Soldier, he was also not the first pick for this role, which was written not for any rappers, as Tarantino's notes tell us, but for Lawrence, nay Larry Fishburne, who turned it down because he felt it made heroin use attractive. Fishburne would also later add, however, fucking Sam walks away with the movie. Sam fucking sticks the movie in his pocket and walks away from it. Walks into a fucking leading man career. I'm sure he wasn't too upset. I mean, he's Morpheus. Though I'm also certain an Afro Lawrence Fishburne would have absolutely delivered here. Yes, Jules was originally meant to have a giant afro. I rather like the Jerry curls. Other possibilities for the role included Eddie Murphy and Charles Dutton, though it was almost given to Paul Calderone, who'd end up with a small name-dropping role after Jackson secured the spot and became a Tarantino mainstay with a second audition. Interestingly, Pulp Fiction is the only instance to date where Jackson and Tarantino appeared together on screen. One thing that actually kind of fascinates me is that Jackson was also considered for the role of Marcellus Wallace, alongside Ving Rhames, who smartly turned down a role in 1994's Renaissance Man to help bring the character to life, with an added touch of mystery too, by way of an oddly placed bandage. His soul wasn't sucked out as some contend, he merely cut himself shaving. Now, you'd think, given she's on the cover and she'd headline two of his later films, that Tarantino had Uma Thurman in mind for Mia Wallace right from the start. But that's not the case at all. In fact, he didn't write this role with seemingly anyone in mind, and his potential casting list included quite a variety of actors, including the likes of Virginia Madsen, yes, Michael Madsen's sister, Alfred Woodard, Jennifer Beals, and Bridget Fonda. And the list of people who auditioned or were considered for the role is just as varied, including Rosanna Arquette, who ended up playing Jodie, beating out the likes of Pam Grier, who we'll talk further another day, Isabella Rossellini, Meg Ryan, Daryl Hannah, Joan Cusack, Michelle Pfeiffer, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who apparently turned it down due to her commitment to Seinfeld, Holly Hunter, Halle Berry, Annabella Sciorra, and even Jennifer Aniston. But while all this searching was happening, Uma Thurman's agent insisted she'd be right for the part, and so her and Tarantino, who didn't think she was quite right at this point, met for dinner, where they didn't so much talk about the movie as each other. In an interview with Rolling Stone, Tarantino actually compared the meeting to the scene in Pulp Fiction where Vincent takes Mia to Jack Rabbit Slim's. If you remember that scene, Tarantino said, the two people don't really know each other. It's a strange situation, kind of unusual, why they're there together. But in the course of having to suffer through this thing, a connection happens. They click into each other and begin to appreciate each other. And Uma and I were doing that scene. We were living the movie, all right? I left thinking, who is that girl? God, she could be Mia. I was still meeting with a bunch of people, however, he continued, and I didn't know Uma was Mia until the next time I went out on a meeting. It was with this terrific actress who totally got the piece. But I'm sitting there giving her my private thoughts about Mia, stuff that Uma and I had talked about that's not on the page, when all of a sudden, I felt like I was cheating on Uma. It felt like I was having an illicit affair. How can I talk to another girl about Mia when Uma is Mia? And that's when I knew. Except Uma Thurman turned the role down. At first. Reportedly, after, on her agent's advice, Tarantino called her, read the script to her over the phone, and convinced her to take on the role. And apparently to become his muse, which he's since referred to her as. We'll touch on that and their, we'll call it a relationship for now, another time. Though I already mentioned him briefly, I should note one other Reservoir Dogs player makes for a pretty prominent role in Pulp Fiction, and that's Tim Roth, who plays Pumpkin, a character that was written for him. Not only that, his honey bunny, who shares all his scenes, was specifically written with Amanda Plummer in mind. And I could see why after her performance. Just 3 other supporting roles were also written for specific actors. Fabienne for Ariya Jacob, who turned it down for 1994's Three Colors Red. That will come up again shortly. Fabienne would, of course, go on to be played by Maria de Medeiros, who's just so damn cute and vulnerable here. I kind of love her. Captain Coons, he of the Pocket Watch, was also written for Christopher Walken, who, evoking his performance in The Deer Hunter, delivered one of the most memorable monologues of his, or probably anyone's, career, even if he forgot his lines halfway through. Honestly, it made it even better. And finally, Lance was written for John Cusack, who simply passed on the role, which ended up going to Tarantino's second choice, Eric Stoltz, though apparently some TriStar execs wanted Gary Oldman for the part. In his initial listing of who could play who, Tarantino also had Oldman down as a possibility for Lance. And Pumpkin. And Vincent. After all, along with Walken, he'd wowed in True Romance. I wonder why Dennis Hopper didn't get any love. He was great in True Romance. You couldn't find a spot for Dennis Hopper. He should have been in this. He should have become a Tarantino mainstay. But apparently, early on, Tarantino even considered casting Gary Oldman as Jules, with Tim Roth opposite as Vincent, and the two playing a couple of English guys. Maybe even their same characters from Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. That wouldn't be too far-fetched given Butch's cab driver, Esmeralda Villalobos, is directly taken from the 1991 short film Curdled, albeit with a name change, simply because Tarantino liked the character. We'll explore the idea behind that a little bit later. So they start filming September 20th, 1993 in Culver City on 50 ASA film stock, as Tarantino put it, the closest thing we have to 50s Technicolor. Nice touch. So they start shooting, Tarantino, the cast, and a lot of the same behind-the-scenes peeps he made Reservoir Dog with, including cinematographer Andre Sakua, editor Sally Mankey, production designer David Wasco, and costume designer Betsy Hyman. By November 30th, a little over 2 months later, they've wrapped, and on May 21st, 1994, Pulp Fiction premiered at the Cannes Film Festival, alongside Three Colors Red. Told you it'd come up again. That's not the only time. It's going to come up one more time, but anyways, Pulp Fiction would go on to win the Palme d'Or, the highest prize at the festival, just a few days later, beating out the favorite, can you guess it? Yeah, Three Colors Red, in something of a surprise announcement, which was made by Clint Eastwood and presented by Kathleen Turner. I love how small Hollywood is. I would love to be a part of it one day. Though I guess the clock is ticking a little bit. Spending too much time writing dissections, writing videos about other people's stuff instead of working on my own stuff. Whatever, I enjoy doing this. Tarantino himself was to put it mildly, shocked by his win. I never expect to win anything when a jury has to decide, he said in his acceptance speech, because I don't make the kinds of movies that bring people together. I make the kinds of movies that split people apart. Though, given he went on to thank his amazing cast for the win, he said they turned a pretty good script into an obsolete document, and we're still celebrating the film 27 years later. I don't think he was quite right on that. But I also sort of think he lucked out. First, with the help from Ariya, who he sweet-talked into near obscurity, then with Weinstein, who stuck his reputation on the line for the film, then with the cast, who deliver career performances across the board. But even more so from the start, from the moment the decision was made to not tell the film chronologically. Now, Pulp Fiction's made up of 3 interconnecting stories following our 3 main protagonists, Jules, Vincent, and Butch. In the film, they're presented in this order. First, our prologue in the diner. Then, the prelude to Vincent Vega and Marcellus Wallace's wife, followed by, naturally, Vincent Vega and Marcellus Wallace's wife. Then on to prelude to the Gold Watch and the Gold Watch proper. Finally, the Bonnie situation, which leads to our epilogue in the diner. That's how they are in the film. However, if they'd been presented to us chronologically, with some artistic merit so as not to completely throw the story out the window, they'd have been in something like this order. First up would be the prelude to Vincent Vega and Marcellus Wallace's wife, followed by not Vincent Vega and Marcellus Wallace's wife, but the Bonnie situation. Then the entire scene in the diner, perhaps cross-cut. Then we'd get to Vincent Vega and Marcellus Wallace's wife, and end with prelude to the Gold Watch and the Gold Watch. You can even pop Walken's speech at the beginning if you wanted to keep it truly chronological, though I think it needs to be coupled with Butch waking up before the fight. But even so, even though all the stories tied together, if the movie went like this would mean Jules' storyline would have been completed halfway through the film, just before he's unceremoniously tossed aside. That we'd spend most of the start of the film following Vincent through his reverse hero and bathroom journey, and we wouldn't have met Butch at all until halfway through. This chronological order, it wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have delivered a satisfying arc or 3-act structure. We wouldn't emotionally connect with it. It'd be ups and downs and an almost haphazard evolution. It'd mean starting right off with Jules and Vincent's Royale with cheese discussion, following them up to the apartment and the eventual shootout/miracle there, back into the car and poor Marvin, onto their meetup with the wolf and Tarantino himself, then off to the diner and that whole thing, followed by the brief introduction to Butch and Marcellus. From there, though, we'd follow Vincent's night through Lance's house, on to picking up Mia, through Jack Rabbit Slim's, through the OD, right until he drops her off back home. Then the movie would completely switch gears over to Butch, who we'd follow until he kills the protagonist we just left behind, and then on to his weird journey and its end. And the very last scene would be Butch and Fabienne riding away on Zed's chopper, the sound of which, and this is a fact, is the very first thing you hear in the movie. Very circular. I kind of dig it. But I honestly didn't realize how bad a chronological cut would be until I'd written out that monologue that I just finished spouting off. Plus, starting off with Vincent and Jules would almost make this feel like it's not something new, but merely a continuation of Reservoir Dogs. They're not just cracking the same sort of jokes, having the same sort of irreverent conversations. They're practically wearing the same outfits and eating the same food and searching for a suitcase. Are Jules and Vincent from the same crew as Mr. White and Mr. Pink and the others? Is this the same time? Is this a sequel to Reservoir Dogs? Will we be seeing more of that story? Is this all we're going to get from Tarantino? The theories such a beginning would be wild. The distaste would be palpable. And all that just from starting the film without a short prologue. And even with that, early reviews still called out the similarity. I mean, just imagine how that late in the film switch up of protagonists would go over. I can tell you, not well. Plus, honestly, with everything that happens in this story, putting it in chronological order wouldn't give us any time to digest, to appreciate anything. And there's a lot to digest and appreciate in this film, starting with the very first few seconds, where we're presented with a definition. Talk about highbrow. And until recently, I always assumed that first definition, the one about soft, moist, shapeless matter, was simply kept in to match the dictionary, to give audiences a moment's pause. But both of those definitions work for this film, don't they? Lurid subject matter. Check, definitely. Soft, moist, shapeless mass of matter? Check, 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 and check, and check. But we're still digesting that as the film truly begins, just as Reservoir Dogs did, in a diner, in the midst of someone's conversation. These someone's not a gang of tuxedoed burglars, but rather a rather colorful couple, Honey Bunny and Pumpkin, discussing, well, okay, robbery. So the apple didn't fall far. We'll talk a bit more about them later. But before we move on, there's something fun about this scene that's maybe not readily apparent. It's already introducing us to the circular time play that Pulp Fiction would come to be known for. In case you never caught it, while our focus is on Honey Bunny and Pumpkin, a few minutes into the opening scene, you can clearly hear Sam Jackson's Jules say, yeah, I was sitting here eating my muffin.
Yeah. Correct. Same as Banks.
We'll hear it from his side at the end of the film.
Yeah, I was sitting there eating my muffin.
But sticking to this beginning, not long after that, John Travolta's Vincent strolls through the background, as we know, on his way to the bathroom. Now, those interesting cross-references are a bit tricky to catch, but the others are fairly obvious. The scene ends on a freeze frame of Honey Bunny as she shouts her line. It's the only freeze frame in the movie. We'll come back to that in just a second. Because that line of hers, no, I'm not going to say it changes. We hear it one way here, and when we see her again later in the movie, we hear it a different way, with a different delivery. Why? Tarantino says it was intentional to show we're seeing the same events from different perspectives, which don't always align. But could it be something more? Could it be a reflection of divine intervention? Perhaps. Perhaps Tarantino watched 1985's Clue, and the events we follow are just one way it all could have happened. It's a heady theory, I know, as most Pulp Fiction theories are, so let's move on. But keep that in the back of your head as we keep going, because that freeze frame dovetails into the relatively long credits, but more importantly, our first taste of the film's scoreless soundtrack, Dick Dale's surf rock rendition of Misère Lou. Tarantino said he picked surf rock for the film's motif as, to him, it just sounds like rock and roll. And I happen to agree with it. And I also think that the soundtrack, which includes snippets of dialogue like we'd seen in Reservoir Dogs soundtrack, and like that soundtrack, the music in Pulp Fiction was a particular highlight in this film for me, and something that really sets it apart from some of its other contemporaries. Now, the credits give way to our introduction to Jules and Vincent. And after that opening, seeing them, it's almost comforting, isn't it? It's even more familiar than that diner if you've already seen Reservoir Dogs, but in a way, a heightened form of what we've already seen. Because yes, while we do get the banter about the metric system, which seems very on brand and very inspired by Tarantino's own time in Amsterdam, where Vincent just so happened to have been, we also get the foot massage anecdote, which is not a throwaway line, not a one-off monologue, but seemingly a simple way to introduce the godlike figure that is Marcellus Wallace, which is what this entire scene truly is, even though we don't yet see him. In a lesser film, we would have cut away to him throwing Rocky Horror to his death, which would have been cool, don't get me wrong, but unnecessary, because his presence already hangs over everyone and everything in this scene. After all, he is the one who sent Jules and Vincent. He is the one who got screwed over. Of course, the situation also culminates with the infamous line, "Does he look like a bitch?" and leads to the ominous recitation of the half-made-up Ezekiel 25:17. Almost as if it's not from the Bible we know. Maybe it's from the Marcellus Wallace translation. Though it's likely more a nod to Sweet Jesus Preacher Man and nearly word for word lifted from Bodigadu Kiba, aka The Bodyguard. I keep saying things like this, but more on that later. It was also directly taken from an early draft of From Dusk Till Dawn, so there's that as well. And let us not forget the mysterious briefcase and its 666 combination and golden glow, a glow that's immediately repeated multiple times during Brett's subsequent execution. What is in the briefcase, though? Those Reservoir Dogs diamonds? Seems like that was the original plan, according to Avery, but as Tarantino now likes to say, it's whatever the viewer wants it to be. I read someone somewhere who posited that it could even be Elvis's gold suit. That true? Maybe. The theory I've heard most over the years is that it's Marcellus's soul. I touched on this earlier, but proponents of this theory point to that shaved neck bandage on the back of Marcellus's neck, which is said to be where the devil removed it, as well as that combination. But let's be honest here. Other than 1, 2, 3, which was, and I swear this is true, at one point the combination to my briefcase, 666 has got to be one of the most common combinations in certain circles, right? And if you think about it, Marcellus Wallace certainly doesn't seem to be too soulful when he orders his men to scour the earth looking for Bush later, right? He would have had his soul back at that point. And maybe if that were an accurate theory, maybe he would have acted differently. Unless the soul doesn't really do a whole heck of a lot for one's character. So I personally think it probably does. So I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that theory. For the record, though, all that was in the briefcase was an orange light bulb. Beautiful. Here we cut to a title. Vincent Vega and Marcellus Wallace's wife, as well as briefly forward in time, though we don't know it at first. Enamored as we are by Bruce Willis's angsty confusion and Ving Rhames' soothing voice. Though we soon see Jules and Vincent's new, I guess we can call them outfits. And well, there's a big old mystery here, isn't there? And though the scene almost feels out of place, it's extremely crucial, setting up the dynamic between Marcellus and Butch, Vincent and Butch. Butch, it's worth noting, is the one who keyed Vincent's car, according to Tarantino. And, more importantly for the moment, Marcellus and Vincent, who seem very buddy-buddy. I suppose you'd need to be if you're asking someone to take your wife out on a date not date. I mean, Marcellus goes to get Vincent breakfast later on in the film, so they're obviously on pretty good terms. That is, unless you go down the rabbit hole, that is the theory Marcellus thinks Vincent is a complete screwball and intentionally set him up. But I really think that's a stretch. But here, we dive a bit further into Vincent. We see him purchase his madman heroin, see him use said heroin to the tune of the Centurion's Bullwinkle Part 2 in a very natural-born killer sort of way. Travolta, apparently, never used heroin before, so he hooked up with a recovering addict Tarantino knew, who told him, if he wanted to know what it was like, to get plastered on tequila and lie down in a hot pool, which sounds lovely, but also, apparently, is only a touch of what heroin is really like. Wow, I mean, I don't know what else to say to that. Travolta and his late wife, Kelly Preston, apparently tried out the advice, so with the tequila and the hot pool. I bet that was a pretty fun night. By the way, I don't want to gloss over Lance, but he's not all that important, is he? I mean, you can look at him as something of a stand-in for a dipshit American husband, the Al Bundy of Tarantino's universe, if you will. And he did help save Mia's life, but given his monologue about getting wrong directions was cut from the final film, there's not that much to him besides the dudeness of his character. And Rosanna Arquette's Jodie and Brana Gallagher's Trudy are even less important, though they do get some fun, rather memorable lines.
That was fucking trippy.
So let's move on to Mia, because, Mia. She's the heart and soul of this film, if there is one. And though much of her and Vincent's interactions are driven by the soundtrack, particularly Dusty Springfield's Son of a Preacher Man in their opening scene, is Vincent the son of a preacher man? And Chuck Berry's You Never Can Tell during the twist competition. And it's almost odd, though in keeping with Tarantino, that we see Mia's feet before her face. I wonder if that would have still been the case if the cut scene of her interviewing Vincent had stayed in. But there's a beautiful romanticism here, isn't there? It's like a meet cute, and totally a date, even without the cut get-to-know-you conversation they have about Amsterdam. Such is the magic of Jack Rabbit Slims, I suppose. The wax museum with a pulse, as Vincent put it. Though, you gotta remember, he's probably still pretty high when they get there, or at least coming down, so coming into this set with its neon, its rollerblades, its characters, would be a lot to take in. Side note, We could, at one point or another, see Ed Sullivan, who I always thought was Richard Nixon. That's what happens when you don't watch old TV, I suppose. Ricky Nelson, Zorro, Marilyn Monroe, Mamie Van Doren, and Buddy Holly, played by Reservoir Dogs alum Steve Buscemi, who had to refuse the role of Jimmy due to scheduling conflicts. Now, there's a lot of fun touches in this scene, like the way the $5 milkshake is ordered. Martin and Lewis, or Amos and Andy, basically double vanilla or double chocolate. The way Mia's failed Fox Force 5 pilot teases Tarantino and Uma Thurman's later collaboration on Kill Bill, plus the whole follow-up to the Tony Rocky horror tale with the perfect summation from Mia.
When you little scamps get together, you're worse than a sewing circle.
And of course, that nod to Travolta's former life as a dancing superstar, even though the dance number was completely copied from the 1963 film 8½. There is a reference to Saturday Night Fever, but it's not the dance. It's Mia telling Vincent, "I knew that you could," something of a catchphrase from the older film. I knew that you could. All this is fantastic, as is the cinematography and editing here, which changes, evolves as we follow their growing intimacy. A technique mirrored in the diner later. But I noticed something this last time watching Pulp Fiction that I hadn't before. Mia's seemingly throwaway comment after she returns from her bathroom bump and grind that, "Don't you just love it when you come back from the bathroom to find your food waiting for you?" It's a cute line, slightly overshadowed by cocaine use, but it also works as a thematic introduction to Vincent's bathroom issue. Because it basically boils down to you get what's coming to you. And every time Vincent goes to the bathroom, which is an odd thing to say about a film, given bathroom breaks are generally not included in cinema, except, once for the audience. But here, it happens rather frequently, doesn't it? Probably for Vincent due to his cocaine/heroin use. And every time he goes to the bathroom, something horrible awaits him. We see this first shortly after Jackrabbit Slims, after he and Mia head back to her place, where he literally has to talk himself off the ledge of wanting to be with her. He certainly doesn't want to be another Tony Rocky horror, only to find her ODing in the other room to urge Overkill's cover of Girl, You'll Be a Woman Soon, which reached number 59 on Billboard as a single after this. The power of good filmmaking. The curse next struck at Butch's, which obviously didn't go well for Vincent, and though we could give a special nod to him ruining Jimmy's hand towel, finally, at the diner, when he comes back only to find Pumpkin and Honey Bunny robbing the place. Backing up a second, getting away from the bathroom issues, what do you think would have happened if Mia hadn't OD'd? Would the two of them have hooked up? Would they have left feeling as connected as they were following this gut-wrenching exchange? Would she have told him her ketchup joke? Me, I rather like their connection. I like them. Certainly more so than I like her with Marcellus, given his soullessness and the fact we never even see them speak to each other. And I like to think Vincent going crazy to save her, crashing his car into Lance's home. I mean, did you see the way he just sailed into it? I mean, he demolished the place and the car, which is a long way from him being upset about it getting keyed earlier in the day. I like to think this reaction was less cover my ass and more I don't want her to be hurt. It's hard to say, really, but interestingly, the whole OD fiasco brings up another thematic connection across the film. Death, or the prospect of it, forcing characters to hide out, to seek refuge and find a way to fix it. Here, obviously, with the OD forcing Vincent and Mia to Lance's. Next up, with Butch killing the other boxer and trying to stick it out in the motel before blowing town. And finally, Jules and Vincent heading to Jimmy's after, a different sort of bump and grind. Vincent's car, by the way, is that same 1964 Chevy Malibu that Tarantino bought after Natural Born Killers was optioned. And it was actually stolen during Pulp Fiction's production and wouldn't turn up until 2013, 19 years later, when a sheriff spotted a couple guys stripping the completely restored car, which had a false VIN. Who knows? Maybe we'll see it in another film at some point. Maybe that Vega Brothers spinoff. Do you think I think Mia's the heart of this film because she ends up getting stabbed in the heart with a needle the size of my forearm? That was fucking trippy is right. Did you know that shot was filmed in reverse? Which is partially why we never see the needle dig in. Though we do hear it. And I think that might be worse. It certainly helped make this a scene that stuck with me over the years, though it could also be because of, well, all the great little details. Lance's countdown, that close-up drip off the needle, the close-up of the mark, Mia's shock and awe when she comes up. I mean, it's a tense, wild ride of a scene that almost thankfully gives way to the briefest of denouements before we oh so poignantly fade out on Travolta blowing his kiss, and fade in to what seems to obviously be the past, with Christopher Walken introducing us to the gold ass watch in that beautiful speech of his. Did you know the kid who played Butch here actually sat through the entire speech? I mean, the things we subject kids to, man, I tell you. But this gold watch, if you listen carefully, you realize it's only been worn in times of war. First the Great War, then World War II, and finally the Vietnam War. I don't think I should say finally, actually, because once Butch gets that watch off the kangaroo, ever notice the kangaroo's boxing gloves? It's like a spirit animal, but also, I guess, a nice tie back, as is him singing the Captain Kangaroo theme song, to him learning about the watch's existence from Coons, isn't it? But when he slips the watch on, he certainly seems to go to war, doesn't he? I mean, before that, before he puts it on, he seems like he's going to be all right. Seems like he's going to get his winnings from reverse betting on his fixed match. Seems like he's off to join Andy and Red on the sunny Pacific with his is she pregnant girlfriend Fabienne. I mean, she's pregnant. I mean, why else would she be thinking about how sexy she'd look with a pot belly? Why else would she want a huge breakfast complete with blueberry pie? Why else would she say, as Bruce Willis slips out of frame for her pleasure, Butch, my love, our adventure begins. Little baby Butchie. I mean, that's obvious to me now after having children. I never picked up on it before. And true story here, that's what they called my dad when he was young, little baby Butchie. Yeah, true fact, true fact. But then, perhaps because he also succumbs to the curse of the bathroom, and after a quick crossover with Marvel's Ant-Man, he puts the watch on. And what happens here? The very next thing, his confrontation with Vincent. And you know how it goes from there. But I'm slightly ahead of myself, aren't I? We skip the entirety of Butch's cab ride with Esmeralda Villalobos, a Spanish name, as she points out, though she's Colombian. It means of the wolves, which she explains in the extended version of the scene. As well as the brief, seemingly final reunion between Vincent and Mia. So brief and nonchalant, I'd say we know for certain now that their moment has passed. And also, that the time for romance in this film has passed, as we quickly bypass them to focus instead on Marcellus. Standing over the fighter we discover is dead, who's been killed by Butch in the bloodiest bout one radio announcer has ever seen. I wonder how that other fight on the marquee went. What was it? Vossler versus Martinez? Two buddies from Tarantino's video store days, duking it out, it seems. Of course, Butch's last name being Coolidge was also played on here, with that Coolidge versus Wilson thing. Ask my wife, and she'll tell you I know nothing about the presidents, the past presidents, but apparently those two were often compared or something? It's beyond me. Back to important matters, though, in many ways, the cab drive is a necessity in this film. It not only lays up the insanity, the larger-than-life scenario we're about to witness, through Esmeralda herself, of course, who is such a weird inclusion in this story, but this scene also gives us a lull, some breathing room to recover and prepare. For what? For Vincent to get blown the heck away with Marcellus's discarded MAC-10. Then, moments later, for Butch to confront Marcellus, run him down, launch a shootout, complete with a split-focus shot that, unlike Tarantino's previous efforts, works perfectly, and culminating in a beatdown you fully expect to go one way, but which is then interrupted by Maynard, played by Dwayne Whitaker, and his brother Zed, played by Peter Green, who had quite the year, given 1994 also saw the release of the only other film I know him from, The Mask. Yeah, he played a not-so-nice guy there, too. Tarantino actually wanted the late Christopher Jones to play Zed. You might not know the name. I didn't, because except for one small part in 96's Mad Dog Time, which he did as a favor to a friend, Christopher Jones quit acting after the 1969 murder of Sharon Tate, the topic, as seems to be the case often here, of a future episode in this series. Now, of all the turns in Pulp Fiction, this has got to be the biggest WTF moment, right? Them waking up gagged, tied up, Zed's arrival, and then the Gimp, who has no official backstory, though Tarantino has said he imagined the Gimp was once a hitchhiker who'd been picked up by Zed and Maynard 7 years earlier. Presumably after the name dropped, yet never explained Russell, served his purpose. Just, wow. You know, if you think about it, Butch gets off kind of easy here. Not just in the end when he's given a pass to go about his life, giving him, despite a broken nose, a bum leg, and a crashed Hana, one of the film's few happy endings, though he does go out on the 4-note Twilight Zone motif as used in the Marquette's Out of Limits, so who knows how it all really ends. I mean, Twilight Zone wasn't known for ending happily. Not just there, but along the whole way. I mean, he lucks out with his timing at the apartment, with the game of eeny meeny, with the way he breaks his binds with relatively minimal effort, then knocks the Gimp out with one punch, and from there, if he wanted to, he could have pretty much gone about his life without a care. But here's the thing. Butch, he's an honorable man. We know from that cab drive and from the earlier setup in the club that he's an honorable man, a prideful man. Remember, pride stings. And if he had followed Marcellus's advice, that whole pride only hurts, it never helps, Butch would have left. He would have left Marcellus to his fate, his cries drowned out by the rebels' Comanche. Sidebar, Tarantino wanted the Nax My Sharona for this part, but the rights had already been licensed. So, like I said, Butch, he's honorable. And with an honorable weapon and his family's watch, his family's pride, front and center, he saves the man who had only just vowed to scour the earth to end him. A man who we last see, chronologically, with his back to us, standing over the squirming Zed, dehumanized, elevated, absolutely terrifying. Though, of course, because this is Pulp Fiction and time is a funny thing, this isn't the last we actually see of him in the film. Marcellus also briefly appears, looking, well, I suppose the happiest I think we see him in the final segment, the Bonnie situation, originally titled Jules, Vincent, Jimmy, and the Wolf. Bit on the nose, that one. But the Bonnie situation brings us way back to the beginning, right where we left off with Jules and Vincent. In fact, we see a portion of those earlier scenes again from a new perspective, the fourth man, played by Alexis Arquette, who seems to also suffer the bathroom curse. But because of either his terrible aim or perhaps, if you fall into Jules' line of thinking, the touch of God, and perhaps an editing mistake or two, we're treated to a miracle and what we're told is a radical shift in Sam Jackson's character. While we've only spent a few minutes with Jules at this point, nowhere is this more apparent than in the final way he uses his favorite Bible passage. But we'll get there in a moment, because first, I want to talk about Vincent. In fact, I want to posit something. If we had seen this Vincent earlier in the film, before On a Date Vincent, how would we feel about his character? How would we feel about his connection with Mia? Because at this point in the film, I rather like Vincent. But at this point in the film, we'd yet to see, well, any of this. Sure, we'd already witnessed Brett's execution, but he kind of sucked, and it was stylized. Here, it's incredibly graphic, paired with that fourth man's ruthless death. And though there's a bit of humor here as Jules and Vincent look each other over almost in sheer disbelief, that's all topped off with Vincent's immediate distaste and anger toward Philomar's Marvin, this poor kid cowering in the corner, barely able to comprehend what's happening to him. And then Vincent shoots him in the face. Sure, you can argue it was an accident that Vincent's careless with his guns, which is pretty accurate and pretty obvious, but who points a gun at someone's face like that if you're not prepping to kill him? He 100% did it on purpose. And because of that, now 100% reminds me of his ear-cutting brother. Though I suppose I should have gotten that with their almost near-identical deaths. Plus the way he says a please would be nice a little later on.
Please would be nice. Come again?
The relation is obvious.
Are you gonna bark all day, little doggy? Or are you gonna bite? What was that?
According to an interview with Lamar, by the way, Travolta was the one who came up with the idea of Marvin getting shot in the face, as he was originally supposed to get shot in the throat and get put down with a headshot. Poor Phil, though. This was only his second film role, so I'm sure if handled right, a great, surprising, awful death scene could have helped launch his career as well. I think he ended up all right, though. Phil Lamar, I mean. Marvin? Well, I think he ended up crushing the tiny little pieces at Monster Joe's truck yard. Not so all right for him. We never actually do see Monster Joe in the finished film, though, do we? Just his daughter Raquel, played by Julia Sweeney, who is hot for cleaner. But the role was cast and a whole scene shot with the late, great Dick Miller, Mr. Futterman himself, where he and the wolf allude to, well, many bodies being crushed up there. So many that they joke about a frequent flyer mile equivalent. A whole body for the price of a body part. I get why this scene was cut, but I gotta say, it's a real shame that we didn't get even a glimpse of Dick Miller in the final cut. Back to Jules, who, despite wanting to tell Marcellus he's done and out, we never do find out how he ends up doing. He handles having a dead guy's brain splattered all over him and his car rather professionally, and in doing so introduces us to his partner, Jimmy, played by Tarantino himself, and a little while later, thanks to the much appreciated help of Marcellus Wallace, the Wolf, who cares absolutely nothing for the speed limit, and as you know, played by Harvey Keitel, who of course also played Mr. White, aka Larry Dimmock in Reservoir Dogs. And Jimmy? His full name? Jimmy Dimmock. They're related. Obviously, Keitel isn't playing the same character here, but he does seem to go above and beyond to treat Jimmy extra especial, doesn't he? From complimenting his choice of coffee to buying a new oak bedroom set to compensate him for his troubles. Honestly, Oak's nice is one of the most criminally underrated lines in this film, and if it had been delivered by someone other than Tarantino, probably wouldn't be. I said earlier Steve Buscemi almost had this role, which is interesting to consider, but Tarantino chose to play Jimmy over Lance. Yeah, because he wanted to be behind the camera during Mia's overdose. Behind the camera for Jimmy's scenes? An uncredited Robert Rodriguez, who'd direct Tarantino again in the not-so-distant future. I have to tell you now, aside from the fact that Tarantino plays him instead of a more experienced character actor like Nick Cage or Michael Keaton, who are on the shortlist for him, or hey, why not Gary Oldman, I have a fundamental problem with Jimmy. Even if I adore him calling Jules and Vincent a bunch of dorks after they change their clothes. And it entirely boils down to his use of the N-word. His overuse of it even. Yes, it pops up time and again in other portions of this film, though not anywhere near as often as the F-word, said 265 times. Yeah. But this is the N-word. Rather different, with a rather different weight to it, and never does it feel as egregious, profane, or unnecessary as it does coming out of his mouth in this segment. Now, granted, the line about the sign out front, brilliant. Brilliantly racist, but brilliant. And to his credit, brilliantly delivered. But it's an awful word. At this point, it should be a dead word. Unfortunately, Tarantino doesn't seem to agree. We'll talk about his use of the N-word several more times, in fact. But let's wash all of that out of our mouths and move on, because that all brings us back, or should I say, Vincent asking Jules so coyly, "Feel like having breakfast with me?" brings us back full circle, back to the beginning, back to Pumpkin and Honey Bunny, who we come to find out are really Ringo and Yolanda. I've never met a Ringo in real life. I feel like it's a made-up name. I don't think there's really a Ringo out there. But we don't focus on them this time, but rather keep our attention on Jules and Vincent and their conversation, which, while it starts casual enough and gives us a nice vocal callback to the start with that, I wouldn't go so far as to call a dog a filthy animal. As the dialogue grows more intense, as Jules reveals he's going to walk the earth.
What you mean walk the earth?
As Vincent argues against the so-called miracle, we follow the pattern set by Vincent and Mia's Jackrabbit Slim encounter and slowly zoom cut in, starting from a shot of the two, then a medium close-up, then a tighter one, and somehow tighter still, building up to that moment we know is coming with that "Garçon, coffee" line tossed in as a reminder in case we're not fully up to speed. though not before Vincent takes his final trip to the bathroom, leaving Jules to deal with the situation on his own. Well, at the start.
Jules, you give that fucking Nimrod $1,500 and I'll shoot him on general principle.
Though it originally included a what-if scenario of sorts with Jules shooting them both, in the final cut, this ending is a relatively quiet, introspective, redemptive scene. Aside from Honey Bunny's ride or die reaction when Jules grabs Ringo anyway. I love that. I love that entire thing. But a lot happens here. From the bad motherfucker wallet, Tarantino's wallet, by the way, and a reference to Shaft, obviously, to that renewed use of the Ezekiel quote, which makes you wonder as it's being said, doesn't it? Is Jules going to kill Ringo on the other side of the quote? That's what he says he always uses it for, after all. And we know this isn't the end of his or Vincent's story, so killing Ringo here would almost make sense, right? But Jules doesn't. Ringo, who's just glimpsed what's in the briefcase, and perhaps a nod to 1972's Superfly, Jules tells him it's his boss's dirty laundry. But whatever is inside, well...
It's beautiful.
But Ringo, he gets a second lease on life thanks to Jules buying his life. And in the end, everyone walks out. Everyone goes home. Well, not literally. Jules and Vincent go to the club to meet up with Marcellus. Pumpkin and Honey Bunny, I don't know what they do. They leave. But you get the point. And what a wonderful walkout Jules and Vincent have. Slow, methodical, that half turn and tuck, all set to the lively one's Surf Rider. Just brilliant. And a wonderful, meaningful way to end the film that you wouldn't have gotten if the film were presented chronologically. But imagine you're one of the first people to see Pulp Fiction. It's 1994. You're at the Cannes Film Festival. It's a midnight-ish screening. You're probably not completely sober. You're probably a bit tired. How do you feel after you've watched this? What do you say? Do you clap? Do you stare at the now blank screen in awe? As Kenneth Turan pointed out in the LA Times after Cannes wrapped, Pulp Fiction ended up being the most talked about film at the festival, though not necessarily the most admired. Janet Maslin in the New York Times called it stylish and exhilarating, and described it as bracingly off-kilter as it mixes lurid, outrageous elements with sweetly appealing ones, to the point where the viewer never has the faintest idea what to expect. And in a spoiler-filled Variety review, Todd McCarthy called Pulp Fiction a startling, massive success and a spectacularly entertaining piece of pop culture, but noted it'd be a real test of Miramax's marketing savvy in turning a niche picture into a crossover item. Now, if we were just relying on the tried and true methods, he might have had a point there. The poster is a beautiful homage to the pulp books of yore, but while I knew plenty of people who had it hanging in their dorm, it's honestly a tad busy. The trailer, while starting off pretty perfectly and emphasizing the Palme d'Or win, quickly overstayed its welcome, and the newspaper ads, remember them? Well, they were alright, I suppose. But what McCarthy may not have counted on was the marketability of Tarantino, who, as he'd done previously with Reservoir Dogs, hit the road and many a film festival to promote and build buzz for Pulp Fiction, from Nottingham and Munich to Taormina, Locarno, Norway, and San Sebastian, all the way to opening the New York Film Festival. So by the time Pulp Fiction opened to the public in wide release, mind you, well, wide-ish, about 1,100 theaters, but still unheard of for an indie film, it was primed for success, and it ended up raking in $9 million on opening weekend, became the first indie to earn more than $100 million in the US box office, and worldwide took in over $200 million, against a budget of $8.5 million, and another $10 million or so in marketing costs. Still, do the math, it's not too shabby. Come award season, Pulp Fiction would win 23 awards from 48 nominations, including Best Film, Director and Screenplay, and Best Actor for John Travolta at the Los Angeles Film Critics Association Awards, Best Screenplay at the Golden Globes, Best Director and Screenplay, as well as a few others, at the Independent Spirit Awards, and, perhaps most famously, Best Original Screenplay at the Academy Awards, awarded to both Quentin Tarantino and Roger Avery, who were sitting on opposite sides of the auditorium that night. Their acceptance speeches, which you can view online easily enough, but I'll link to in the description below, were odd, to say the least. Tarantino went on a bit of a rant about nothing, and Avery, after thanking his wife and perhaps taking some inspiration from that year's Best Picture winner, Forrest Gump, or perhaps Honey Bunny, said,
"And I really have to take a pee right now, so I'm gonna go. Thank you."
got a good chuckle from the audience, but apparently really ticked Tarantino off. He walked up there and thanked his wife and said, "I have to go to the bathroom," he'd recount later. "I expected no less. I was trying to take care of Roger, which finally made me feel like an idiot, because I knew I was a better friend to him than he was to me. Roger would be working at an advertising agency right now if my mother never met my father, if I never existed. Roger never would have directed one fit of film ever, and if I hadn't written Pulp Fiction, he would have never won an Oscar. Dude, chill, relax. Man, you are full of yourself." But again, I guess they've made up. Personally, I don't know that I could. Of course, today, Pulp Fiction's achieved well-earned cult status. Who knows how many copies have been sold on VHS, on DVD, HD DVD, Blu-ray, Laserdisc, and digital, all sorts of things. I'm betting a lot. And then there's the merchandise. I mean, how many posters have been sold? The film's soundtrack reached 21 on Billboard. A paperback of Tarantino's screenplay, published by Miramax, even became a bestseller. Because of Pulp Fiction, Bruce Willis went on to have a great career. John Travolta, similar. Samuel L. Jackson inevitably inspired a comic book character, then became that character. The movie's been selected for preservation in the National Film Registry. The Royale with cheese was voted one of the best lines ever, etc., and so forth. Yeah, the film did pretty well for itself. Harvey Weinstein even often called Miramax the house that Quentin built. That's rather remarkable, but accurate, because aside from its commercial success and its effects on Tarantino's career, Pulp Fiction's cinematic importance lies well beyond that. It not only sort of introduced many to what seemed to be a new genre of film, it single-handedly altered the course of independent films. Miramax was suddenly top of the game. Hollywood was looking at independent films in a new light. Oh, so these can make us $100 million with very little upfront costs? What? New independent-focused distribution arms popped up like prairie dogs. True independents, the ones who couldn't afford $10 million in marketing, started to get squeezed out, as did many of the actors who'd led them. And those who did continue on or come on, well, the likelihood of them taking lowball pay became smaller and smaller, meaning budgets started to climb, meaning expectations started to climb. As Peter Biskin wrote in Down and Dirty Pictures, Pulp became the Star Wars of independence, exploding expectations for what an indie film could do at the box office. And it also marked something of a shift in what films, particularly popular films, could be. As Ken Danzinger wrote in The Technique of Film and Video Editing, Pulp Fiction's imitative and innovative style represented a new phenomenon, the movie whose style is created from the context of movie life rather than real life. The consequence is twofold: the presumption of deep knowledge on the part of the audience of those forms such as the gangster films or westerns, horror films or adventure films, and that the parody or alteration of that film creates a new form, a different experience for the audience. Jeffrey O'Brien, in an essay on Tarantino, put it in a simple way that's nonetheless rather perfect, writing, "Pulp Fiction is more a guided tour of an infernal theme park decorated with cultural detritus. Buddy Holly and Mamie Van Doren, fragments of blaxploitation and Roger Corman and Shogun Assassin, music out of a 24-hour oldie station for which all the decades since the 50s exist simultaneously." Now, that can all almost be said about Reservoir Dogs as well, but what sets Pulp Fiction apart from its rather similar predecessor is the execution. Unlike the copy and paste we saw in Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction is more like an undergrad writing a college essay. Copied, pasted, referenced, and altered to get around those pesky plagiarism rules and deliver something new, something of merit. We've already touched on a couple like the Ezekiel speech, those 8.5 and Deer Hunter odes, that outright character theft from Curdled, Harvey Keitel's repurposed cleaner, that nod to Superfly. But the film is absolutely riddled with references, and not just the obvious ones like Marilyn Monroe's Subway Fun or all the TV shows and movies that seemingly line every frame, but deep cuts, like Lance's heroin presentation seemingly being pulled directly from Taxi Driver, or the dance number evoking 1964's Band Apart, the 1943 film Air Force inspiring Christopher Walken's speech, Butch simply being a recast of a character from 1955's Kiss Me Deadly, which also featured a glowing suitcase, Psycho inspiring the way Marcellus spots Butch, and 1973's Charlie Varick one of his key lines. Maynard and Zed, they're straight out of Deliverance. The weapons Butch considers but discards could allude to any number of films. 1972's Buck and the Preacher did the Fourth Man reveal much earlier, and honestly, I've got to stop there because I could just keep going on and on and on, because those are just a touch of the references inside of this film. Now, as you can tell from my cultivated collection of quotes, critics have analyzed this aspect of Pulp Fiction for almost 3 decades now, and most are hit and miss, but I particularly like this succinct quote from an essay by Gary Roth, in which he wrote, "Tarantino's characters inhabit a world where the entire landscape is composed of Hollywood product." Honestly, I think it simply boils down to what you know. If you grow up reading Shakespeare, you're going to write something that seems awfully like Hamlet, though perhaps presented in a new direction. Consider The Lion King as a prime example. And if you grow up watching films from across the decades, well, I suppose you get Pulp Fiction. You write what you know. We'd already seen this in Hollywood with the previous generation of filmmakers, and Tarantino was no exception. In a lot of ways, actually, he became the rule. But that is something we'll explore further in the next episode of the Tarantino Dissections. For now, this has been the Drunk on Writing dissection of Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to give it a like, leave a comment below, share it with a friend, and above all else, subscribe to the channel. You can also head on over to drunkonwriting.com to become a channel patron and get extra goodies, plus more episodes more often, usually. Thank you for watching. This was an absolute labor of love that turned out far more complex than I originally intended, but I'm particularly proud of it. So until next time, as always, cheers and keep on writing.